What's up, everybody? I'm Renee Montgomery. I'm a former WNBA basketball player here in the U.S. I'm now part owner of the Atlanta Dream, and it's always been my dream to perform at the highest possible level. That's something Ora Washington was denied. She too played my sport, and she played tennis too. My word, did she play tennis. In fact, she was the Serena Williams of her day. In this podcast, Untold Legends, I'm telling her story. You can listen or watch here with me on YouTube. It's a very special tale, and I'm excited to bring it to you. Before we start, please note, this episode contains some outdated language that may offend. North Philadelphia, 1969. Just outside the offices of the old YWCA building on busy Germantown Avenue. The tennis and basketball courts are just over there, around the back of the building. Sign up for classes happens at reception, just inside. It's now more than 20 years since Ora's victory over Althea Gibson and Dr. Robert Whirlwind Johnson in Tuskegee. Nearly half a century after the first tennis lessons with Miss Yancey. Even longer since she left the family farm in Caroline County, Virginia. But on this day, Miss Ora Washington once again has an appointment here.
I met her at the Germantown YWCA, which is where she had played a lot of tennis when she was younger.
This is Lynn Lear, veteran reporter for the Philadelphia Tribune.
I remember when she opened the door, my first impression was she didn't smile, probably didn't have much to smile about.
It's been a while since Ora last spoke to a journalist.
She was, I guess, something like 69 years old. She was still thin, and she looked sad.
Lynn and Ora find a quiet place inside the warren of corridors and meeting rooms in the Y, and Ora's first interview in decades begins. What neither of them know is that it will be Ora Washington's final interview. From BBC Sounds and the BBC World Service, this is Untold Legends, Ora. I'm Renee Montgomery, former pro basketball player, now co-owner of the Atlanta Dream women's basketball team. Episode 7, our final episode, Flowers for Ora.
I have been a journalist in Philadelphia for exactly 55 years.
You can't get much more Philly than Lynn Lear. He says he's been in the city so long, he'd need a passport just to pass city limits. We caught up with him at his home, a house crammed with archives of a lifetime spent chronicling this city's stories.
My first job was May of 1967 with the Philadelphia Tribune, which is the oldest African-American newspaper in the country. And I cannot remember exactly how it came about, but somebody had contacted the paper and said we should do an article on Ora Washington, whom I had never heard of.
This is the late 60s, some of the most dramatic and tumultuous years in American history, the era of the Civil Rights Movement and the rise of Black Power, and a time of tragedy, the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King and the killings and beatings of protesters. And in sport, it's also an era of inspirational Black talent. Boxer Muhammad Ali, basketball legends Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And at a historic time like this, Lynn's editors want him to go and interview some retired tennis players from the 20s.
Somebody said she was getting old and she was not in great health, and that we should do this kind of a tribute piece for all she had accomplished.
And he's not the only one who isn't sure about the story.
Well, no one had heard of her in the newsroom. This is not unusual, of course, in a newspaper. People call all the time and suggest story ideas, their neighbor, their friend, their family member, their teammate, and so forth.
Sorry, but I have to respectfully disagree here. For me, it is unusual, even strange, that no one in that newsroom had heard of Ora. Winner of 8 tennis national singles championships, 15 doubles or mixed doubles titles. In basketball, she'd been one of the most powerful female players of her generation, captained one of the most dominant female teams of the age.
And it's just a tragic story, in my opinion. If this were to happen today, this would be front page news everywhere. And almost no one even knows about this.
And Lynn doesn't work for just any newsroom. This is the Philadelphia Tribune. 30 years earlier, Ora had captained a basketball team sponsored by and named after this newspaper. And Ora had been a local hero to the very people that the Tribune newspaper exists to serve, Philadelphia's Black community. But of course, this is now a very different era, and Ora's name is fading fast.
Well, once I met her and asked a lot of questions, I was absolutely floored to learn that she was possibly the best female athlete in the country in the first half of the 20th century.
And Lynn discovers that Ora is still working in domestic service.
So she was doing housekeeping, she told me, even when she was playing tennis and basketball, because she made little or no money playing sports. See, she didn't make money as an athlete. And it's just hard to imagine this today when you see people like Serena Williams, for example, and she had nothing.
Here's what we do know about the last 3 decades of Ora's life. The Tribune wasn't the only newspaper to lose interest in her when she stopped winning prizes. There's an interview she gives in 1941 to the Baltimore Afro-American where she talks about her plans to retire and hints that her family are concerned about her health. She tells them,
"What more can I get from playing tennis anyhow? I won my 155th trophy last week at Philadelphia. I was the only player, colored or white, ever to win the single, doubles, and mixed doubles the same year. Today, however, the old court is getting too long for me to race up and down. After all, I am 40 years old."
Ora's maybe being a bit strategic with her age there. She's probably closer to 42 or 43 than 40, but none of that takes away from her extraordinary talent. For me, she comes across as frank and also proud. It's like she already knows her place in U.S. sporting history. In 1947, 6 years after that interview, Ora wins her final tennis trophy. That's the battle with Althea Gibson and Whirlwind Johnson at the Tuskegee Institute that we heard about last episode. We know she enters one final tennis championship the following year, but this time, Althea gets her revenge and beats Ora in mixed doubles. Ora's around 50 when that happens. Then it seems like she really does retire, and information gets much more scarce. It's the start of a slow disappearing act from the media and public records. In 1950, the census reports that Ora and her brother Larry are sharing an apartment in Philadelphia. We know Ora's always been close with family, going all the way back to her childhood with her brothers and sisters on the farm in Virginia. But in these later years, it seems to be even more central to her life. Here's historian Pamela Grundy. She sought out friends and relatives of Ora's after her death.
Well, it's completely clear that she was always very connected to her family. It was a large family. Everyone seems to have been close. You talk to people and they mention, living together, supporting each other, sometimes financially. The fact that there was family there was just tremendously important.
And by 1950, it's not just her brother Larry that Ora's living near. She co-owns her apartment with her sister-in-law, Christine, and their cousin Grace now lives next door too. Did Ora talk much about the old days with Larry, Grace, and Christine? The days when her picture was in the paper every month with another trophy, another championship. I know that for some athletes, it can be real hard to let the past go.
And it sounds from what people say that, she wasn't boasting about the great athlete she's been. She had a lot of trophies, which she was extremely proud of, but she didn't talk about it a lot. She'd say something every now and then, or if someone asked questions, she'd speak about it. She didn't sit around reminiscing that much.
Ora's nephew, J.B. Childs, also spoke to Pamela, and he remembered a tight family too. Big reunions back in Virginia, cookouts and barbecues with brothers and sisters, nephews and nieces. But outside Aura's family life, we don't know that much about her personal life and intimate relationships. There are no reports of any relationships with men. No one seems surprised by that. Some people assume that Aura's deliberately mannish appearance, men's pants, men's shirts, were designed to send a signal that she was either gay or not attracted to men. Certainly that kind of clothing was far more of a statement in the 40s and 50s than it would be today. J.B. Childs also lived in the same building as Aura during the late 40s and early 50s. He told Pamela Grundy that Aura was close to a woman living in the building at that time, and it's pretty clear J.B. believed they were in a relationship. The recording of J.B.'s words is difficult to hear, so we've asked an actor to speak his words.
That we lived in her house. It was a 3-story house.
We lived in her house. It was a 3-story house, and we lived on the 3rd floor. She wound up living with another woman. And when she was home, she dedicated more to her, of her time to this other woman. So therefore, she didn't take too much opportunity to spend time with no one else.
JB is remembering living in the building in 1950, which happens to be the year of the census.
1950 U.S. Federal Census. Head of House, Aura Washington. Female, 52.
And the census does show a female lodger in the building that year. Adrienne Maree Brown is a feminist activist and author of books including Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good. She's also interested in Aura's story. We heard from her in a previous episode.
I would love to ask her who held her heart, who did she love and who loved her, when did she know or accept that she might not ever marry, and how did she feel about that? Was she lonely or did she feel satisfied? Who made her feel most loved in her life?
Adrienne's been looking through photos of Aura at tennis championships over the years.
I also picked up on the number of times that she was choosing to wear pants as opposed to the skirts that they were told to compete in.
It's such a tiny detail, but one of the few personal things we know about her.
We look back and there are actually lots of examples of these women who were masculine before there was a space or a societal acceptance of that masculinity. And now we have so many categories and subcategories and language for what that means. I'm curious, though, for her, if it was something that she felt like she embraced and acted upon and maybe was able to find some satisfaction and connection inside of it, or if it was something that maybe she didn't understand herself or had embarrassment around or just was like, this is just how I am. That it's actually the most liberating thing we can do to pursue our passions. And it sounds like she did that, but I would love to ask her. Yeah.
Alabama Tribune, May 17th, 1957. Aura Washington of tennis fame now lives in virtual obscurity.
In 1957, the fact that Aura has been forgotten by the media becomes a news story itself for one day. It's actually a more thoughtful story than the headline suggests, and it gives some information about her living conditions.
In a small, inconspicuous North Philadelphia apartment lives one of the greatest women athletes America has ever known. If history were able to repeat itself, and the tennis world could have seen fit to drop its racial barriers 31 years ago, Philadelphia would probably have the distinction of honoring Miss Washington as the holder of the National Women's Singles title.
So, after a short moment of attention, a single day where it seems like maybe Aura might be going to get her dues, things return to normal, back to silence. The steady process of public forgetting continues. In 1960, the Philadelphia Tribune runs a photo of Aura meeting some teenage Black tennis players at a prize-giving ceremony. She's described in a photo caption as a former tennis great, but no other information is given. Here's another way of measuring how this great athlete completely slips out of public view. In the 1930s, at the height of her career, her name is mentioned in almost 500 Philadelphia Tribune articles, so very roughly once a week on average. In the 1940s, her name is mentioned in 290 Tribune articles. In the whole of the 1950s, Ora's mentioned just 47 times. And in the whole of the 1960s, she's mentioned only twice, so far as we can tell. And so I'm left wondering, what did Ora make of the huge changes that took place in sport and the country during that time? Most of all, what did she make of the end of the official color bar in sport? Racist rules had blocked her from competing against the best white players, rules that had kept her from achieving the fame and success of white athletes. What's so heartbreaking to me is that the whole color bar system began to crumble well within Ora's lifetime, just a decade after she retired from tennis. If Ora had been born a generation later, her place in the global history books might have been very different. And the Black female player who did lead the way, it's someone Ora was very familiar with.
Making history. Philadelphia Tribune, July 9th, 1957. Miss Althea Gibson, New York, goes low to slam home match point in the finals of the women's singles at Wimbledon.
Yes, the great Althea Gibson, the teenage Harlem prodigy who Ora had played and beaten back in Tuskegee in the 1940s.
Miss Gibson becomes the first Negro to win an individual title at Wimbledon in its 80-year history.
Wimbledon is arguably the most prestigious tennis tournament in Europe. A year before, Althea becomes the first Black person to win the U.S. Nationals, the predecessor to the U.S. Open. And because of that, Althea instantly becomes a truly global superstar, appearing in movies, magazines, even recording her own album. It's a selection of smooth jazz ballads, if you're interested. No other Black female athlete had ever got that kind of worldwide attention, and it's not even that common, even today. I have to wonder, how does Ora feel when she reads about these achievements in the Philadelphia Tribune or watches Althea on the TV being interviewed on talk shows? Pride? Joy? Justifiable anger that it wasn't her at the Wimbledon and the U.S. Open? Or some combination of all three, and more? And is there any way Ora could have broken through the collar bar herself? Let's go back to that day in Tuskegee in 1947, the day of Ora's championship mixed doubles victory over Althea. At some point in the day, someone asked the four players in that match, George Stewart, Ora, Whirlwind Johnson, and Althea, to pose for a photo in front of the net.
Well, that's very interesting because I have that very photograph on my wall.
Sally Jacobs is a journalist who is writing a book about Althea Gibson, and she's an Ora Washington fan, too.
It's a great photo. Okay, the four people from left to right. The first one is George Stewart, who was one of the most talented Black players, male players of Althea's day. Next one, of course, is Ora Washington. The next person is Whirlwind Johnson, who was Althea's mentor, and, of course, Althea on the end.
There's a lot going on in this photo if you look closely. It's in the body language. Ora, wearing glasses and with touches of gray in her hair, but still with strength and confidence in her posture, and with the look in her eyes that shows she's ready to play for keeps, as she always did. And on the end, holding her racket almost shyly, teenage Althea.
She has an interesting pose. She's a little bit tilted, arched to the left, a little kind of curious, looking at you. Why are you watching her kind of thing?
She doesn't look like the all-conquering hero yet.
But it's really very much the very beginning for Althea.
The photo shows Ora and Althea at opposite ends of their careers. Ora on the verge of retirement, Althea at the very beginning of her success. But there are so many parallels between Althea and Ora's stories.
Well, they certainly had similarities in bearing and demeanor. Both of them were quite aggressive Black women. They played hard. They didn't care too much about niceties. They were out to win. And you have to remember, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, that wasn't something that women always did, frankly.
And that's not all. Both were considered manly or unfeminine by the standards of the day for their appearance. And both of them received a lot of prejudice and bigotry as a result. But of course, the biggest similarity, at their peaks, Ora and Althea were both undefeatable monsters on the court. So if they were so similar, why was it Althea, not Ora, who broke down the collar bar and went international? Why don't we have footage of Ora winning at Wimbledon or the French Open?
By the time Althea comes along, the Black community was beginning to get their players in the white tournaments. Althea was chosen by the two doctors as the one. They were going to get her into the U.S. national tournament.
The two doctors being her two mentors, Whirlwind Johnson and Dr. Hubert A. Eaton. Both of them devoted years of their lives to coaching and mentoring Althea. As in so many areas of the civil rights struggle, Althea didn't act alone. She had a whole team and community behind her, a team guiding her, supporting her, and molding her as the path breaker. Whirlwind and Dr. Eaton helped Althea not just because she was a great player, but also because they knew her talent could be used as a weapon against the collar bar. So their training went beyond tennis. When Whirlwind Johnson moved Althea into his family home, he coached her in tennis, but also in how to present herself to the white media and the international media.
So she had to look right. She had to play the part. She couldn't be too masculine because that would make people nervous in the day.
So far as we can tell, no one had a vision like that for Ora.
Ora never really even came close to that. No one ever really considered her because Blacks weren't playing in white tournaments. And I think that was a significant difference between the two of them.
Ora was simply born into an era when the collar bar seemed almost unchallengeable for Black athletes. But I have to think that Ora was closely aware of Althea's career and Althea's successes. Not only had they played each other, but Althea's victories in formerly all-white tournaments were huge global news stories in the 1950s, and even bigger in the Black community. It's kind of sad to say, but there's no sign that Althea felt the same way about paying tribute to Ora. As Ora began to disappear from Black media, she seemed to have faded from Althea's memory too. In Althea's autobiography, there's a pretty detailed description of the 1947 ATA championships at Tuskegee, but there's no mention of Ora at all, even though they played each other in the final that year. And of course, no mention of the fact that Ora won that match. So perhaps some of that is why Lynn Lear doesn't know Ora's story when he turns up to interview her at the Germantown YWCA in 1969, and why he is surprised to find she is still doing domestic work to make ends meet.
Well, she was a maid, for God's sake. She was living, believe it or not, with a wealthy white family in the area, and she was a housekeeper. As I say, I don't think she smiled the whole time, and that's unusual. I try to loosen people up, no matter who they are. And she was unloosenable, I guess you might say. I was sad afterwards because she was such a great athlete, and yet she was so unknown. And obviously, this affected her greatly.
Lynn does ask her about how she saw her career.
Well, she did say she wished she had had an opportunity to play against the great women's athletes in the country, all over the country, no matter who they were. She wanted to be recognized for her skills by everyone, and she wasn't.
And she responds to these questions with dignity.
She did not express anger, rage specifically. She was more or less, I would say, sad over what could have been and should have been. And that's probably a part of being a Black athlete in those days. I mean, what's the point of expressing rage until somebody like Muhammad Ali came along? It's been documented over and over again about Black athletes. So I think it was just internalized. It had to be.
On May 29th, 1971, according to her death certificate noted in the New York Times, Ora Washington died in Philadelphia. She was 73 years old. She is buried in Caroline County, Virginia, not far from her old family farm. As we heard at the start of our very first episode, when the Black Athletes Hall of Fame decided to honor Ora's name in 1976. They aren't even sure if she is alive or dead. At that time, many appear not to know or remember anything more about Ora Washington. Throughout the making of this podcast, we have been trying to track down living family members of Ora, putting calls out on social media, on genealogy websites, trying to find anyone who can still remember her as a person, not just as an athlete or an interviewee. Sadly, we got no responses until the very last minute. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, well, hello there. It's Renee Montgomery here.
Hi, Renee. This is Gregory Price.
Well, hello there. I'm speaking to royalty right now, and it is an honor.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Turns out, some people didn't forget Ora. This is Gregory Price, former Marine, retired engineer, and the great-nephew of Miss Ora Washington. I got through to him on the phone, and Aunt Ora was a big part of his childhood.
To us, my siblings, my cousins, who spent a great amount of time in Virginia during the summer, she was just Aunt Ora. Hey, Aunt Ora's here. Just show up. Hey, hi, how's everybody? Aunt Ora, how you doing?
I already know. It was like a family reunion.
Yeah, and she'd come down from Philly and, visit my mom.
I'm curious, you knew her different than the public eye knew her. So how do you think she would like to be remembered?
I think she would enjoy the notoriety today if she were in the tennis world today. My sister and I are essentially the last living members of our family who know of her personally, who have had actual personal contact with her. We're the last of the baby boomers who can reach back that far. But anyone after us, they would only know her through stories we now tell and the richness of it.
Yeah, I feel like that's my call to action. That's exactly why I wanted to be a part of this project, because what you're talking about right now, we can't reach back and ask what it was like to have to work a full day's work and then have to perform at the highest level. No one was asking Ora that at that time. But that's where I love to come in and try to amplify this story.
Oh, it's my pleasure to do so. This is nothing short of a hidden figure story. Someone who played two sports at the highest level, championed in both of those sports. No man can speak to that in sports history. No man. Bird, Jordan, Magic, none of those guys. They did not play at the highest level, and they were not champions in that second sport.
You just dropped the mic on us, didn't you? You just dropped the mic.
Did you hear hit the floor?
I heard it. I love it.
Tell the story, and the facts will speak for themselves.
Oh my God. That's been so long ago.
Gregory's sister, Patricia, also remembers Ora clearly. Gregory was kind enough to set up a conversation with both of them at Patricia's home.
She used to tell us how she used to love to play tennis, and she also played basketball with my brother. She would take him out on the court, like I said, over there. And she proved her point.
As we've heard, the big family gatherings were back in Virginia in those days. And of course, to the kids, she wasn't a famous athlete, a sporting legend.
She looked like Aunt Ora, nothing different about her, She was just Aunt Ora. That's what it was. And we sit around, we eat, we talk. And as we grow older, she would sit down and tell us those stories about when she played tennis and when she played basketball.
Gregory remembers those summer vacation days, too.
My Aunt Ora was a very statuesque woman. She seemed looming larger than life. And she was tall and slim. And, she had a baritonish voice. She had beautiful eyes. And when she looked at you, you saw sincerity in her eyes when she spoke to you. She gave you that loving, warm, and fuzzy.
As far as we know, Aura never came out publicly, but we believe her sexuality is an important part of her story. I mean, I can't imagine how hard it must have been. I'm happily married to Serena, and we have a family, and not being able to share that with the world would have been so tough.
My Aunt Aura she was a homosexual. My family, we had no problem with her sexuality because we are accepting of our family members no matter what they believe and what they practice. My Aunt Aura was gay. She had a friend. The fact still remains that she was gay and she was reclusive because of that. So I would imagine those who knew of her sexuality suppressed her accomplishments 100 years ago when she was at her best. And they refused even the Black community, let alone the white community, because of racism back then, precluded her out of print history and white print history, but also in the Black community, especially with the middle and upper class Blacks who lived around and practiced tennis. They adored her as a player, but off the court, they refused to acknowledge her because of her sexuality.
I wonder what Aura would have said if she was here today.
If my Aunt Aura was alive today, to see the changes that have took place racially, ethnically, sexually, she would be proud to stand up and say, yes, I'm gay.
And Patricia says the idea of Aura as disappointed or lonely, well, that's not what she remembers.
I disagree with the loneliness. She had her family behind her. You know, we would ask her questions and she would tell us. She would want to take us over to, we had a tennis court over there where we lived at. And she would play some ball. Not with me, but with my brothers and cousins. They were into it, even though they couldn't beat her playing, but she would play with them,
And Aura's family legacy is continuing.
I mean, my grandson got an award because he said, Grandma, I need somebody famous, to do an essay in school. So I said, well, okay, so you know what? Your grandmother had a sister. She was a tennis champion. And we went online and we found all this on her. And he got an award and an A for doing an essay on his great aunt.
For the whole family, the fact that Aura is now finally getting recognized, finally getting acknowledged as one of the great athletes of the 20th century is a relief and a point of pride. And for me, following this story, it's a point of pride too. We can't change what Aura had to go through, the struggles she put up with, but we can try to pay tribute, to remember, to make sure Miss Aura Washington finally gets her flowers.
Well, when my brother told me about it, I'm like, what? Somebody want to do something on Aunt Aura? I felt so good, that now, even though this is 2022, she's still being recognized.
Untold Legends is a Stance Studios production for BBC Sounds and the BBC World Service, and I'm your host, Renee Montgomery. Thanks to everyone who has left ratings and reviews. I really appreciate your support. You've really helped get the word out. And don't stop. That way, more people can discover the story of Aura Washington. And we're still searching for more information about Aura. Maybe you know somebody who met Aura, or maybe you know something, anything that would help us further piece together her life story. Tell us. You can get in touch by visiting bbcworldservice.com/untoldlegends. Untold Legends Aura was produced by Leo Hornack, Shanice Davis Yeagley, Rachel Porter, and me, Renee Montgomery. Our executive producer was Crystal Genesis. Our story editors were Kelly Reardon and Rachel Fontaine. The show was engineered and sound designed by Rob Tate and Mark Bush. The music was composed by Asha Ivanovich. Our researchers were Georgina Gonzalez and Saskia Sewell-Netterloff. Our cast was Cameron Williams, Alex James, Ken Foster, Serena Grace, Omar Francis, Joy Vandervoort Cobb, and Allison Brown. And our fact checker was Georgina Gonzalez. Special thanks to Charlie Bell and Zara Martin. And thank you to the BBC team, digital and sport editor Anna Doble, for coming up with the idea in the first place, Al Riddle, the senior podcast producer, and the commissioners Richard Maddock and John Manell. Thank you to Charles Albert Tinley and Document Records for providing the music, What Are They Doing in Heaven Today? And The Lord's Prayer, performed by the Southerners. Plus, many thanks to the following newspaper publications: the Afro-American Newspaper Archives, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Philadelphia Tribune, and the writers Ed Harris, Joe Rainey, and Inez Patterson.